Welcome to And It's Live, the podcast which dives deep into football's most iconic seasons, stories, and what ifs. If you love football, history, tactics, and nostalgia, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and drop us a like on YouTube so you don't miss an episode. Hello and welcome to part 2 of the main events look at 2003-2004 in the Champions League. I am Martin Ramsey, your host as always, and as always I'm joined by two of my bestest friends. Adam's here, how are we doing?
Good, thank you. Yeah, looking forward to getting into this. There's some really interesting ties in this. I think when it sort of blows open as much as it does in the latter stages, it's interesting to see how it starts and how things could have went other ways. So loads of goals again, which everyone on the planet except you likes, and lots of fun.
Davey, loads to get into this week.
Yeah, and continuing the theme that we spoke last week, a lot of goals, and a bit of a change. But Martin, stick in, son, because next year José Mourinho and Rafa are here.
Yeah.
So
José and Rafa, I mean, you goals at a premium as they should be. Anyway, last 16, the group. You know, we had our minute silence for the second group stage. It's death last time. We are straight into the last 16 and some interesting ties. The first one, alphabetically, Adam, it's Bayern Munich versus Real Madrid. Not really met one another all that often. No, they have. They've met each other seemingly every single year for the past 6 seasons. I mean, royalty obviously 1-1 in Munich. Roberto Carlos equalising. Again, Roy Mackay seems to score just about every single game that Bayern play. And it's a kind of scruffy as the Dan goal. I didn't think those existed. From about 5 yards out, kind of looked like he was offside. People kind of stop, but it was only 1-0 to Madrid. Not quite living up to the semi-final of 2000, for example. And some of the, even you would have to admit, some real tense quality games. This looks like two fat, complacent clubs.
Yeah, I'm fed up talking about Real Madrid and Bayern. I don't want to talk about them anyway. To be honest, as we know from anyone who's listened to these, they're not my favourite two.
I hate to tell you this, mate. If you don't want to talk about Real Madrid, the next 10 years are not going to be a lot of fun for you on this show.
Not the next few, though. That is the interesting thing with this is, you know, Real, big win here. I'm sure a lot of people felt, right, okay, that semi-final against Juve last year, that was a bit of a blip. You know, they seem to win. They seem to be winning in even years at the moment, 98, 2000, 2002. It's going to be theirs. Well, we're going to see them troubling the scorers for quite some time after this. I'm pretty sure. But I can live without the two of them for a wee while. I think I would actually agree with you, Adam, and I love an overdog, as you know. David, your love for Celta Vigo was put to the test against Arsenal, the Edu Derby, a couple of them popping up with goals. Robert Pires getting the final goal in a 3-2 win for Arsenal in Spain. And then the game done at half-time at Highbury. Tyrion Reid scored a couple. And again, put on top of that, finale in the San Siro, what's happening in the league. There's a lot of contemporaneous stuff that it's all coming up Arsene Wenger here, and this Arsenal team just easing through the gears.
Yeah, I was telling you when we went off the air last week that Vigo are a team that stuck in my mind because I used to watch Revisit a lot, and I really enjoyed watching them. And when Arsenal beat them in this match, so convincingly, the first leg in particular, it was a good game, but Arsenal for an away side to play like that, it was one of those ones where you thought, yeah, that over 2 legs, the quality is going to come through by a bit, and it did. And look, that Arsenal team should have beat that Celta Vigo team. But it was the fact that how often on this show have we said Arsenal should beat that team and they hadn't. I thought that they looked pretty well set to go on and do something in it, and they were looking irresistible domestically. They were flying and people were by this stage of the season, people were talking about the invincible thing. But they were just, when Arsenal could get, this Arsenal team got a head of steam up, they could score from pretty much, it felt like anywhere. I mean, a lot of them tended to come from the guy who would hog the left wing and come inside a lot, but they had so many other players who were capable of scoring goals, and you see that in this particular match. But yeah, I just thought, right, okay, yeah, they had that terrible start to this group, and maybe now that's them, sorted. They can kind of go on and focus on this a little bit and win the Champions League. But you're right, contemporaneously, people in England were not talking about Chelsea. They were talking about Arsenal as being the English team who could go on that season and win it.
Lokomotiv Moscow, Adam, I think you said we're quite happy they drew Monaco, and it looked that way in that first leg in Russia, 2-0 up, and then Morientes gets a goal back, an away goal, of course, important in those days. And back in the Principality, Big Dado Pusso, if you've not forgotten him from last week, pops up with the only goal to put Monaco through. I don't want to kind of preempt too much next week because we're going to go into in depth in a wee bit of detail with how Deschamps has set them up. But again, should this be a team that, let's, for example, say Real Madrid should be wary of in the quarterfinals? They're not pulling up trees, I guess, is the point at this moment in time.
No, they're not. I think they will, obviously, as you know, and the goals will start flowing. Which is, I'm looking forward to discussing that because it's not something you would necessarily think of the current version of Didier Deschamps. To be honest, so it's interesting. We can dig into what they do this season. For Real Madrid is interesting here. Obviously, we've spoken about them, and we'll speak about them again. But given Morientes out on loan and allowing him to play against them is one of those decisions that they've obviously just went, oh fuck it, whatever. So he goes there, and I think he is a bit of a catalyst, I guess you could say, in that. I really, what's the word? I don't want to say economic, but one of those players that just did everything, I think, quite precisely. He always did a decent touch. He always did a nice header. He'd make the right movements. He was a pretty clinical finisher, but also quite a nice finisher as well. Like there wasn't a lot of scrappiness about it. Just a really good football, and I think him going there really helped them to set the bedrock of this season. I mean, we talk about Monaco and Porto getting into the final and how that's great. Monaco, the top two scorers in the whole tournament are both Monaco players now.
Yeah,
that probably happens a lot more now with Real Madrid players or whatever. But you wouldn't get even that happen this year. That the top two players are a team that's in the French league, for example. So that, I guess, shows that attacking style that Deschamps had that we can dig into. But yeah, this one's probably just about getting it done. I guess with this group stage, second group stage now being gone and straight into the last 16s, there probably is an element of kind of feeling each other out. It's the winter break and we're not the winter break in some areas, but you're then getting into like mid-February and teams are getting back up to speed with playing in Europe again. There's probably a little bit of that, but yeah, Monaco getting through and Lokomotiv Moscow, like I said, delighted to get to that stage. Probably thought it was winnable, but ultimately they just Monaco just got it over the line.
Davy, Milan very professional, 0-0 draw in Prague against Sparta, 4-1 at the San Siro, cruise through. The other Italian side there is Juventus. They go to La Coruña and they lose 1-0, but again, not the end of the world, I wouldn't imagine. Would fully be expected to turn that round in Turin, but Walter Pandiani had other ideas because after 12 minutes, Depor are 1-up there, 2-0 on the tie, away goal in the pocket, and all of a sudden very much in control. This was a bit of a shock.
This was a bit of a shock, yeah. And, remember, we're still reeling from this as a team that were capable of shipping 8 in a group stage game, folks. And they're up against Juventus. But you nailed it. It's just a completely professional performance across 2 matches, getting your noses in front and then keeping them at bay. And that, I think, is possibly the surprise thing when you see a side that's been involved in a couple of big results, and you think, well, they're a sort of fun side that can hit highs and lows. But this is a really clinical, professional performance from a Juventus side that I think at the time had a little bit of trouble against sides who would park the bus, in a phrase that's just about to be minted in the next couple of seasons. And we've seen this so often, football, low block. But in a 2-legged tie with away goals, if you allow yourself to be in a position where a side can just do that, I don't think you can really complain too much about how you found yourself there. And that is what happened to Juventus. The game, they could not impose their game. They ended up having to play the game they did not want to play, because their forwards were quick. They like to get players in behind. You can't do that against a side who are just going to sit back and say you can have the ball in front of us. And in the end, they couldn't break them down. Nedved, his strength was getting into the box, arriving, making things happen there. He's got a lot of the ball, but not where he's going to hurt Depor. And in the end, as I say, it's tactically, it's an absolutely perfect 2-legged performance from Depor, and they deserve to go through.
And they would play another Italian side in the quarterfinals, and we'll come to that later on, Adam, because I'm very interested to know how they managed to do that. But they still bloody love a cross, as we saw a couple of seasons ago. Lyon are another quite professional performance against Real Sociedad, 1-0 away, 1-0 at home. Thank you very much. Mourinho starting to make his name. I don't think he's quite scoring free kicks from about different postcodes, but they're ticking along very nicely. Let's talk about Porto, Manchester United then, Adam. United very much favourites, as we talked about before. Porto with a kind of a little bit of respect, UEFA Cup winners, and all that, but United are looking at getting back very much on the Champions League horse here. Porto win 2-1 at home. Benny McCarthy with a couple after United had taken that lead. Quentin Fortune popping up. Mourinho, because he's a pure weirdo, probably prefers 0-0 rather than a 2-1 result at home. He hates the away goal. He loves having it. He loves being able to go there and cause damage. He was doing a lot of talking before the Old Trafford game. Would love to manage in England one day. Kind of made noise that Spurs were interested, and they denied that completely. They would soon be lucky to be in the same conversation as him, as his star shot across the sky. Adam, United are good. Cristiano Ronaldo on the bench, not quite trusted for a game of this magnitude yet. Of course, he's just arrived at Old Trafford that season. And Paul scores 1. He scores 2. Really, he's never offside for the second. That really certainly gives United that control. 1 goal obviously puts it back level pegging, but they don't get that second. That nervousness just continues to creep up as the tie goes on. United are battering away, and it's just not quite happening. Porto got a free kick, edge of the box. Tim Howard. He's awful, really. He gets a hand to it, quite a strong hand, but he, for some reason, isn't able to just parry the ball past the post for a corner kick. Instead,
close it back in,
straight into the path of Castilla in the last minute. It's close range, but I still think he has a job to do to get that under control, get it down, the speed of thought, because it's pinged right back at him, but he does it. He's very cool. Mourinho, in that wonderful quote, is charging down the touchline. It's a shock. certainly for the English media, it's a huge shock. But a character in this melodrama of football is almost certainly born that night.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. That away goal, he'd probably be more annoyed at losing that away goal, Mourinho, than Benny McCarthy scoring the 2 goals to come back. If we know how things went with him in terms of how much he valued that defensive side of it later on. The Scholes header's lovely. That kind of ghosting in that he kind of could do despite the size to get those headers. And yeah, Manchester United's goalkeeping problems. Obviously they have great goalkeepers, but they have terrible goalkeepers in between usually. And that sort of certainly comes to the fore there. Yeah, I remember that game. It's probably one of the only games I can remember from this run, remember watching live, if that makes sense. And certainly at this stage, the last 16, and that run down the touchline. Maybe it's just because we've seen it so much before, but I remember like what the fuck is he doing? But it was like people were like, I can't believe this. This is Old Trafford. What the fuck? What is he doing? I don't know if Ferguson felt the same. I didn't know about the Spurs interest, or I must have maybe forgotten about it. But it's interesting when we come on to talking about Chelsea, the noises around them by that point in the sort of semi-final stages of Mourinho potentially taking over, and how much Ranieri talks about how much that affected them actually in the later stages of the Champions League, which is an interesting point that we maybe don't really think about too much. But yeah, certainly at this point, I mean, he's treating this as a job interview as well, really, isn't he? For whoever wants him, it's the full Mourinho show. He's even again the context of winning the league in Portugal. Great, Porto. They hadn't won it for a few years before he came in, but a few years for Porto is a lot. But he must know himself when he's getting to this point. There's a special team here, fair enough, but very unlikely I'm going to take the next step with Porto. He wouldn't have thought in his wildest dreams he was going to win it. So when you're getting games like this coming up against Manchester United at Old Trafford, he's probably thinking in his head, realistically, if I win this game, that'll be me this year. My stock's at its highest. I want to go and manage in a top 5 league or get to Britain. He's probably thinking in that mindset, and he just treated it as that. Obviously, meticulous planning, opposition analysis, all that sort of stuff he was famed for at that point. None of that would slip, but I think personally he probably thought it was a little bit of the José Mourinho show starting. Yeah.
And the run down the track, Dave, I mean, that kind of, people thought it was disrespectful because where it was, but he has kind of given the greatest boss in the world at that time a bit of a bloody nose, I suppose. That's certainly how it was seen. And it was a sucker punch. It was a smash and grab a wee bit.
I'd actually argue that a reaction like that is the opposite of disrespectful. I think it's a measure of how big the result is.
Oh, I would agree, but that's not how it was taken.
No, of course it's not, because people like to find things to get angry about. But to me, it's the exact opposite. José's very well dressed in this era. That is at least £400 worth of trouser that got ruined. So I think there's genuine excitement there, because this is a huge result. And for younger listeners who hear us talk about, well, Manchester United are still probably the second biggest club in the world in terms of support and commercial revenues behind Real Madrid, but right then they are. It's unarguable. They're incredibly glamorous. They are very successful. They're the dominant English side of the last 15 years or so. They are, along with Real, they are absolutely the biggest show in the world game. And to beat them carried a cachet that it doesn't now. That it can't do. It would be more equivalent now, actually, to knocking City out. That the whole, should a team from a non-top 5 league go and knock Manchester City out of the Champions League, it's that sort of reverberating shock that went round. Everybody going, all right. And suddenly people began to actually look at this team in detail, which I know Adam's going to do next week, and realise, this mob is crammed with exceptional footballers, and hang on, there might be something going on here. Now, it being Portugal, it's a side that's going to be picked apart by its success, but what a 2 years. And yeah, it's a smash and grab. In a VAR era, it goes 2-0. Do they come back from that?
They probably, well, this is the
Possibly.
thing. So a lot's been made of that, understandably. Such a pivotal moment, as Adam's described in the whole Mourinho shtick, the whole Mourinho story. And it would have been 2-0. Do United get a third? Well, who knows? But I'd still probably bet that Porto get a goal back, which takes us to extra time, right? So
Yeah,
it's not as if a second knocks them completely out of the picture and all the rest.
they're not idiots. And here's the other thing, by the way, and I thought you made a very good point, and I think it is something to mention. Alex Ferguson had trouble spotting goalkeepers. He spotted 3 in his whole career, in his whole 30 years. Leighton at Aberdeen, who served him very well there. Obviously Schmeichel, and then Edwin van der Sar, who it wasn't, by the way, a particularly big deal to spot Edwin van der Sar. But that's
Very
3 of about, well, yeah, exactly. But that's 3 of about, what, maybe 12 goalkeepers that Ferguson tried over the years at United. It was a real Achilles heel of his.
Just on United very quickly before we go, Davey, Paul Scholes did score. That was his only goal of the Champions League. He only scored one the year before. He only scored one the year before that. A bit of a fallow period there. And United now, last 16, they'll be last 16 next year. They won't get out of the groups the year after. Crazy, but there will be talk around 2005-6-ish, and we'll get into it. But this, I think, this starts this conversation that maybe his time's up.
Yeah, Ollie Holt's infamous book in 2006, which said United are done, Ferguson's done, they'll never win another title under him, and actually pressed for Steve McLaren to be given the Manchester United job to take on José Mourinho. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I don't think that would have worked Ollie particularly well. We'll never know. But there are United fans who'll tell you his best achievement is what he does post 2005 when Mourinho is there, when Liverpool are coming, when to rebuild the side that he did to then go on and win another Champions League and another 2 finals and win several titles. Because in 2006, they are questioning his relevance anymore. Has the game passed them by? Is this it now for Ferguson? And it is it's so interesting because it's this chap who's just knocked him out. He almost starts that conversation, and then he's the guy who's creating it all in. And I think a lot of people at the time were looking at Mourinho and saying, well, this is now what football management is. It's this glamorous, this, be able to switch between, tactics and drilling players and speak about tactical periodization. And you looked at Ferguson, who's this rough, gruff Scottish person who's screaming at reporters. And it did seem like a bit of a watershed moment, but Ferguson is a genuinely great manager and proves it by coming back, adapting, which was always, I think, his great strength, which is why his career had the longevity that it did, because he could adapt to different circumstances. But there was a while where it looked as though Mourinho was going to be the guy who came along and killed off the great Alex Ferguson.
Nope, certainly did. One other game in the last 16 was Chelsea, who beat Stuttgart 1-0 away, an OG, and then 0-0 at the Bridge to continue on. And you're absolutely right, Adam. Ranieri, Jake and a sugary nail here with all those signings. Did Chelsea need to upgrade off the bench or on the bench, sorry, rather than just on the pitch? The quarterfinals then. 3 of the 4 are real stories. Let's start with Milan then, Adam. Depor score first again. It's Pandiani who gets them in front, and Milan huff and puff and it takes them a while. I think they scored just on half time. Kaká scores. Then Shevchenko right after the break. Kaká again, and a brilliant Pirlo free kick. 4-1. Job done. No bother. The European champions march on. The second leg in La Coruña is just insane. And again, in keeping with what a weird old situation this in. Again, it's Pandiani, Adam, that scores early, 5 minutes in that game. Valeron, Albert Luque, they're 3-0 up at half time. They're in charge then, right? Away goal. And then they kick. Fran scores a kind of freak goal, a bit of a deflection. But Milan are just utterly shell-shocked.
Yeah. I think I said this before, but I'm still surprised to see Deportivo kicking about at this stage, to be honest. In my head, it was a kind of once and done. I think this definitely is their last season, which maybe makes this all the more memorable. They had they won the league in 99, obviously, 99-2000, and they had a couple of second place finishes, and then 2 third places obviously gets them into the Champions League. But yeah, I wouldn't have had it as long as this. Maybe worth a quick look at how they did this, I guess. So Xavier Herrera was the coach throughout this whole time. As we said, we're now firmly in the 4-2-3-1 era for quite a lot of clubs, but obviously not Milan, as we spoke about last time out in depth. This was a interesting Deportivo team. They had Albert Luque, who you mentioned on the left, Victor on the right, two quick, pacey wingers, Juan Carlos Valeron, and behind Pandiani, certainly in this second leg game. They used to play quite a lot of long balls. I mean, that wouldn't surprise you to Walter Pandiani. I watched this whole game and they tried it in this game. They definitely tried to do that, but I liked the adaptability of it because he wasn't getting anywhere early doors with Nesta and Maldini. They were just sort of gobbling that up. But it was then that sort of second ball, something that we maybe haven't really spoken about too much, but as that sort of commenced and they play that direct approach, what do you do with the second ball? They used that kind of rotation of space, I guess, is the best way to describe it. We spoke about the strength of that midfield, so they sort of tried to work on breaking that down, not sort of going man for man or trying to pass through, but stretch them out of play. Or stretch them out in the middle. They'd use quite a lot of passes across the pitch, just to sort of, I don't know, try and stretch them out or entice them wider. By doing that, I think it's the first goal. You see Pandiani, who again target man, but he was quite good at dropping deep. He scores that first goal. Watch it back, and there's a space in the middle. And he really smart finish where he sort of swivels and turns it. We spoke about Henry starting wide and drifting in this game. Valeron did the sort of opposite. He was a 10, but he would go out to the left and take a midfielder, usually Pirlo, who was probably the deepest at this point, take him out wide and create that space that we've just been speaking about. So it's interesting. They moved them about. They did a bit of a number on them in this game, and maybe it was just an element of let's just go for it and see what happens, given what happened in the first game. I'm not sure, but there was a lot of clever aspects to it. And see, to be fair, it's one of these things that people say it was 4-0, but Dida had to make quite a few saves in this game. It wasn't one of these games where they scored they had 4 shots and they scored 4 goals. Like, certainly in the early stages, he's made a few good saves. I'm never will be and never have been a great fan of Dida, but I don't think it was his fault in this game. I think it was that sort of midfield aspect of it. They used Mauro Silva and Sergio along with Valeron to sort of dominate in the middle and then get the ball out and get it in quickly to Pandiani. So it was a bit of a job done on them, which maybe pressure off. Like I said, they could just sort of go for it and do what they wanted to do, but it was absolutely thrilling.
That first half was mad. I mean, that first half,
yeah.
You do not expect to see AC Milan of this era collapse, and they do. And we've seen it a few times since. PSG made a speciality of it for a few years, and of course Liverpool against Barcelona. So it's become a little bit more common, but it didn't happen back then, did it? You know, a side who had won the first leg 4-1, they were through, especially if they were the favourites to begin with. But the first half is just a collective. And Adam's right. Is it a case of just that the players? Is it a case of just that the players went, we've nothing to lose here, lads. Let's go out here and chuck everything. And then something special happens. And we've all been at a football match like that where you can't quantify it, but it's that amazing thing with the crowd, the fans, the players. And all 22 players realise it's happening. That's the thing. It isn't just the supporters whipping themselves into it. But what a crazy season Deportivo La Coruña had in this Champions League. I mean, just insanity.
It's also that thing about getting, sorry, I was going to say, it's also that thing about just getting the goals at the right moments. Like, you can imagine the team talk before and you'd be like, right, let's go and play our game, etc. But an early goal would be magic, bang, 1 in 5 minutes. Then you're sort of in the second half and you think, or sort of at the end of the first half, and you're thinking we could really do another one before half time to make it a bit more interesting. Aaron scores 10 minutes to go, and then they get one right on the stroke of half time as well to put them in. I mean, maybe not necessarily in the driving seat, but like you said, definitely leading on away goals, and then getting this the fourth in the last 20 minutes or so. It's kind of perfect. If you need to get 3 or 4 goals, it's start at a half.
You couldn't write
end
it better.
End of the first half, and then another one. Yeah,
it's probably just a combination of so many things. Like Depor, obviously, as you said, freedom. We're going to go for it. We do have pace. We do have strength. I don't think La Coruña is one of Spain's nicest places, but I think the Azores can be noisy and it can be quite volatile, and they also use that. And maybe Milan just a wee bit. Right, we're very good. We've won the Champions League just there by being brilliant in defence. We're 4-1 up. I mean, we'll be fine, lads. And Davey, you're right. When that starts to change, everybody knows, and there's not a lot anyone can do about it. And it's one of these things in sport. It's why even in bad times, fans keep going, because sometimes the pendulum just starts to swing back.
It's why we beat Leipzig. Sorry to interrupt, but it's exactly that. I'm watching history here, and you look at the players, and our players feel it, or your side, but the opposition know it, and there's just something. And you're right. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about our game. I bet you any Depor fan who was there that night, or a Liverpool fan who was there when they did it. It's exceptional. It's crazy, and it might only happen once in your life, but by God, you never forget it when it does.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not going to happen to AC Milan again, obviously. More of that in a few weeks. Let's give you Real Madrid against Monaco. Monaco go ahead in the Bernabeu. They're 1 up at half time, but we're back in this situation where Real Madrid, the storied aristocrats of European football, are 4-1 up with only 7 minutes to go. Very similar to the Milan game. And Morientes, who is still a Real Madrid player, pops up with a goal. It's 4-2. Again, is this really going to be enough? Especially in the Principality when Raul puts Real Madrid ahead. So 5-2. There's an away goal there. But Gili scores just right before half time. Adam's talking about perfect times to score goals. My word, they needed that. I'm not sure this comes off if they're going to half time 5-2 down, but they're not. And then Morientes almost immediately, I mean, 2 or 3 minutes after the break, gets Monaco back in it, and Julie makes sure with a third. And this was not in the script, Davey. Again, another game that was absolutely against the run of play. And it's, Real Madrid are shattered by this. Yeah,
what a super little footballer Ludovic Juli was, by the way. He go into Barcelona and prove it as well. But he really was an excellent player. Just to Adam's point about Morientes, one of these guys who's pretty good at all aspects of his job, Julie. There had been that season, or the season before, rather, a lot of talk about Morientes because Florentino Perez wanted rid of him, not because of on-field performance, particularly, but just because, well, we're the Galacticos, we've got Ronaldo, you're not playing. Basically, I'll put up with Raul because he's a club legend and I've got to, but you're not famous enough, so you're going. But they wouldn't allow him to leave to go to Barcelona, who wanted him. And I think understandably. So they told him he could have a loan, but not to a club in Spain. So he goes to Monaco, and he is brilliant. And you spoke about this last week. The lift he gave that side, because here was a guy who was arriving who felt disrespected, but was to anybody who wasn't Florentino Perez or a Real Madrid fan an absolute superstar. You would have been over the moon to get him. Any club would have been delighted to have him. But he arrives there angry with a point to prove, and he has a sensational season, and he lifts the whole club. None of this, I won't celebrate a goal against my former club, parent club.
Noted that.
Yes, none of that from him. He celebrates. And again, then, this is where Madrid's individuality could be problematic, I think, in matches like this. And not just in Europe, incidentally, domestically as well. When they were playing well, they were a fantastic side. We all know it. They had guys who could make things happen from anywhere on the pitch. When they were up against it in a match like this, then I think they lacked a little bit of team ethos. And I think that's borne out by the results, because if it's purely about talent, this Real Madrid team should have won more than it did. But again, this is a side who are confident, who have a lot of pace, this Monaco team, an awful lot of pace in the side. And they looked younger, didn't they, this match against Madrid? They looked sharper, just more focused, just hungrier, just wanting it more, led by a guy who, this was not business, this was personal. And Morientes was fantastic, but they were by no means a one-man team. Jerome Roten, I think we'll have to start referring to as the French John Lundstrom, because for 6 months, he is absolutely unstoppable. And this is during that period where he is, he's so clever on the wing. He could run back then. By 2010, when he pitched up at Rangers, he lost that ability. But he could actually shift at this point in his career. And he was, he knew he would find, if he got the ball in, he would find a willing forward in Morientes. They had Porto, of course, they had Roberto Spia, the Croatian. They had height in there as well as movement and pace. And I just think that Madrid were on the night beaten by us. This was not a panicked performance in the way that Milan panicked. To me, this was just a side who came up against a side who on the night were tactically better than them, contained enough quality to do it. But again, we're hungrier for the win. And, as I say, Morientes to me is the absolute catalyst for everything that happens in that Monaco season. But he's absolutely the catalyst for what happens in this match.
And it just again typifies the kind of beauty of sport that you don't always see. Maybe what's underneath, because as I said, Real Madrid huge favourites. They would have been amongst the favourites to win the whole thing at this point. They have won 3 quite recently, the 2 other semi-finals, I'm sure, in that time. And this shatters them, because for the next 6 years, we're not going to be talking about Real Madrid in the latter parts of these shows. They do not get beyond the round of 16 for 6 years in a row. This side who have, won 3 in 6 years or whatever, as I said, 2 other semi-finalists, and back to looking like the kind of Real Madrid ownership of old. They're going to go down a bit of a slippery slope for a while. Adam, Arsenal against Chelsea. First game at the Bridge. Good Johnson, who I always think is a better link player than maybe a finisher in big games. He puts Chelsea ahead, but Robert Pires, I think, is the man who gets a quick equaliser. So 1-1, slight advantage to Arsenal back to Highbury. It should really be pointed out at this time, Arsenal really have the wood over Chelsea. Especially when it matters. You might Nigel Winterburn that scored from about 30 yards in the top bin at Stamford Bridge, just in the kind of late 90s, and this Arsenal doing what they're doing, undefeated in the league at this point, and they would for the rest of the season against an English team, against a team that they know so well, and Juan Antonio Reyes, Adam. Bless him. He looked like the kind of next big thing, didn't he? Putting Arsenal in front.
Yeah, he did. Sorry. And I guess it's easy to say. But I remember him coming in and you're thinking, okay, Henry's moved into the middle a little bit. He could be someone that could give them something out wide. It's interesting that you mentioned that about Arsenal having that hold over Chelsea, because I think Desai said after the game he thought that the first leg he thought that we've not done it, we've not done enough here, because I think they had a good spell where they scored, but Perez was able to get a goal back after a few minutes, and I think he kind of came away from it thinking maybe similar to most teams were doing at this point. We've got the away goal, we're going back to Highbury against a team that are properly motoring now. I mean, we mentioned earlier on their performances in the group stage won't take anything here, but the invincible season is very much on at this stage when we're in the first few weeks of April. So all of that together, I guess, is a bit of an issue, and especially when Reyes takes the lead. But this is really interesting, Chelsea. I think, because I was a big fan of Chelsea in the 90s. I think I got the Chelsea top. I think I've spoken about this before, but Kazaragi, Vialli, all that sort of stuff.
The autoglass number.
Yeah. Was probably who I gravitated to a little bit. I've not particularly ever had a number one English team, but they would have been quite close to it, I guess. So I was a pretty avid fan of them at this point. And it was quite interesting because it's this changing of the guard thing that maybe I'd forgotten about or we didn't really appreciate. They were a riot when Ranieri came in 2000. He's won the FA Cup, but the team was a bit unbalanced. They had Deschamps, they had Poyet, they had Zola, they had Ed de Hoy, but fine, but they're all over 30 now, mid-30s in some cases. And I guess they brought him in to sort of deal with that. It was still a bit of a surprise. The interesting thing with Ranieri is he'd done this before, though. Like, he'd done this at Valencia. He'd went in there and they had similar situation where they had Romario in there who was pretty old and running the dressing room and this and that. And he did the same thing. We spoke about Hector Cooper taking it on, Benitez taking it on. Ranieri probably didn't get a huge amount of credit for what he did in the years before that. A team with high wage budget, loads of aging players, and he comes in, makes a lot of changes, brings through a lot of youth. So it's interesting. It basically happens again, which is not something I had really thought about, I guess. I mean, you guys will remember, but that 2002 summer, Chelsea were fucked. Like, financially,
if they hadn't got that. No, if they hadn't got that goal, Jesper Grønkjær scores on the last day. Yeah. It's Liverpool or Chelsea for the Champions League. Had Chelsea, they were 80 million in debt, which sounds a ludicrous amount of money now, but back then it wasn't. And Ken Bates they would have had to call in the receiver. Jesper Grønkjær possibly scores, the most important goal in Chelsea history, because they beat Liverpool on the last day. Whoever wins goes to Champions League. It's Chelsea. They get fourth and Liverpool finish fifth. And because of that, a Russian oligarch buys Chelsea, not Tottenham. And that's it. The 80 million is wiped out overnight. Ken Bates gets his money departs, but it's one goal. It really is. That's what it comes down to.
It's that sliding doors thing, and I think about it looking back, and you think, all right, he's bought Chelsea, fair enough, but maybe what we're seeing just now in real term with Rangers about how difficult it is to try to have a revolution when you've got all these players there that you either don't really want to be there, they're on too high wages, nobody wants them, blah blah blah. But they'd spent that time in the couple of years before. I'm going to assume preparing, hoping for a sale, but also not really having any money as well. They need to try and get these players out the door. Lampard, 2002, 2003, Lampard didn't go to the World Cup, wasn't too happy, never went to the World Cup. John Terry's coming into the fore a bit more, and Ida Goodjohnson that you mentioned. Those three were the kind of that season before were the sort of new leadership group, if you think, but they're all very, very young at that stage. So it's just interesting to see because you've got guys leaving. Like I mentioned, some of those guys there, they'd spent the year before, 2001, Gallas, Petit, Lampard's ending, coming in. But that 2002, they did nothing because of those issues, like you said. So getting to that summer of 2003 was huge anyway for the Champions League point, like you said. But then also Abramovich comes in, and then, like you said, it's just a different world. They're bringing in the best young players, and maybe Ranieri doesn't quite fit at that point, but he's put that groundwork in for 3 or 4 years to cut the fat, make them cut their cloth to suit their means, all that sort of stuff, and then he gets them to that point where he gets fourth. But I think someone mentioned earlier on today, just that although having all those players was just not something that he was ever really aware of, and I think the players all kind of knew that as well, that it just wasn't something that he was used to. I think when Abramovich came in, everybody in the club, I think, just wanted to supercharge it and go and win and just go and be as quickly as possible. Let's just go win a league, do this, do that. And that's just not really his style. I don't think he's much more of a tinker, like you said, or we'll try this and we'll try that. He's just not that guy that's used to competing at the elite level. I think you look back, he's not. Zeman's more highly thought of, Capello, Saki, Ancelotti, all those guys. He was always the sort of, I guess, when you don't have a clear playing style and you also don't win anything, as he hadn't done for a long time, you kind of sort of end up falling between the gaps a little bit, don't you? You win things just by being Ancelotti and getting the best out of players. You win things by being Pep Guardiola or Saki or Cruyff with a clear way of playing. If you don't win anything and nobody's really sure how you play and you bounce around a little bit, then I think you can kind of become a little bit underrated. But he's been involved in some big moments, like you said. Basically, the building that Valencia team and then the sort of base for this Chelsea team was really interesting. So I think when you add all of that together, Chelsea at this stage with all this fraughtness, you mentioned there as well the pressure that he came under when Chelsea had the meeting with Mourinho's agents and things, and he actually says that was a big factor in the next stages. That it's funny when you think about that on a kind of human level. Not something that Mourinho would be too bothered about. I think he took the piss out of him roundly for several years afterwards. But yeah, interesting that that base that he gave maybe doesn't get enough credit for Mourinho coming in with a blank checkbook the year after spending 120 million quid, but also not really having anyone there that was past their best or needed to be shipped out hugely. It's a really fortunate situation to come into.
A couple of things. I mean, first of all, Jose Antonio Reyes, apologies. Don't know where Juan came from, but it kind of underlines my point. This boy looked as if he was going to be an absolute star, and it never really happened, so much so that I literally forgot his name doing this recording. On Lampard, getting into this season, his career is in a bit of flux. He a couple of years on from that incident with American tourists who have been grounded because of 9/11, and he's flashing his knob at them, absolutely pissed. That was a real scandal. It was Fat Frank and all that kind of stuff. He really, and it's under Ranieri. I mean, he would have ran through fire for Mourinho, so he moves that on and becomes one of the best midfielders in the world. But he's a great season here. He's a fantastic Euro 2004. I mean, I know Rooney steals that show, but Lampard is superb for England that summer. So he is working. It's him that scores the equaliser at Highbury. Yet another kind of similar to the Porto goal at Old Trafford. Jens Lehmann not looking overly clever. It's a harder shot, I think, it's fair to say, but Lampard is first to it. Does again, I think this is technically him and Castagna. These are harder than it looks. I think these goals. So he gets Chelsea right back in it. Everything is level pegging. And Wayne Bridge, another of those signings from an English, I think, British Isles player from another English club, maybe didn't steal the show like Crespo and Makelele did. But Davey, this is a brilliant finish. I mean, this is it, right? It's over. Arsenal would need 2 more in a few minutes. Not happening. And it looks like he should maybe take it on his right, but he manages to drill it with his left. And people again forget how promising he looked at that time.
Oh, absolutely. When he was at Southampton, he's the first of what became that sort of production line. Gareth Bale, him, Theo Walcott, that they had going on down there for a few years. When he was at South, I mean, people were talking, this is England's left back for the next, 10 years with Wayne Bridge. And he was actually a very good player who sort of gets lost a little bit in the shuffle at Chelsea. But he was a terrific fullback. Probably, unfortunately and unfairly, best known for the sexual shenanigans of a teammate. Which is a little unfair because he was a very good footballer, and that obscures that. He was a more modern fullback than England had produced, I think, for a number of years. And again, it's part of what Adam's been talking about of the evolution of the game in England, that here was somebody who was becoming more what we would recognisably think of as a fullback now. Lampard this night, by the way, is absolutely fantastic, Martin. Like, it's funny because we always associate Gerrard as the sort of Roy of the Rovers type, don't we? Well, this is a Brian Robson performance.
Yeah,
Frank Lampard minus the injury. He's just everywhere, constant, driving this Chelsea team on. And you're right, because I think correctly he's seen very much as a Jose man, and he is, and he was.
And he develops, but he's on the road to it.
He's on the road to it here, yeah, and this performance was just superb. And you're absolutely right. When that goal goes in, it's done. They're not getting through, and they know it.
Furious, man.
He was absolutely spewing. Because again,
Arsenal, they had chances, like they did, and they didn't take them. And you're absolutely right about Wayne Bridge. Wayne Bridge is just an unlucky guy, I suppose. You're having to share a dressing room with John Terry's unlucky enough. But you're right about the kind of noise around him, and he makes this move to Chelsea just as an even better English left back breaks through and really has a phenomenal season at Arsenal. And
I was about to say that.
Ashley Cole's not a particularly endearing personality either, but he was a sensational.
He was the best in the world for a while.
As he proved at the European Championship as well.
He was the best in the world for a while. Bridge's problem was, he could arguably be, not arguably, he was one of the best fullbacks in the league. Ashley Cole was the best fullback in the world, left back in the world. But that doesn't take away from the fact that he was a good player and a sensible signing as well. Because absolutely, you looked at his age, you looked at his profile. He was somebody that was going to last a number of seasons for them. But this is what his career peak, if we're being honest.
And Porto and Lyon is the other quarterfinal, and Porto just do what they did, beat Lyon 2-0 at home, score first in France, and that is all done. It was 2 each on the night in France, but obviously 4-2 on aggregate. No problem. Thank you very much. And the only quarterfinalist that I don't think was involved in any kind of major drama, really. And hard to remember, really, I suppose. But I'll be honest, Monaco, Chelsea, Porto, Deportivo as Champions League semi-finalists. Again, given we wax lyrical about the quality of last season's, and to be honest, a lot of the seasons that we've just gone over, boys, probably about 5 or 6, that you just get genuine top-class semi-finalists. This felt it's anybody's, probably not Depor's, but again, heroics there. I'll be honest, I did fancy Chelsea. I thought there was maybe something in the water there. The way they kind of dealt with Arsenal. Can any of you remember, not being professors in hindsight, who you maybe fancied as we got into the quarters, semis.
I thought the winner of Chelsea Arsenal was going to win it.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I just thought with the whole Chelsea, I know Monaco are raining goals in. Josie with the sort of Old Trafford thing, I guess. If you want to be Professor Hindsight, you can say it's kind of one of those things that might be.
I still don't think anyone was saying it, Adam. Though
no one saying it at the time.
Was, that's a back projection for sure. That night, Old Trafford, I think that's fair. But no one was saying, "Well, Porto are they're going to cruise it." But it was certainly up for grabs. Chelsea and Monaco, Depor and Porto, and lots more besides next week. Thank you, David.
Pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Adam. Plenty of goals for you next week as well.
That's my favourite. Can't wait. Thank you.
Until then, bye for now. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, search for And It's Live Podcast. We've got new deep dives, drafts, and breakdowns dropping every other day.